I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto Cedar Ridge Road and saw the padlock gleaming in my headlights like a threat. My name is Lucas Yates, and I had lived in the Pine Valley Heights development outside Denver, Colorado for 3 years without any major issues. Sure, the HOA sent me a passive-aggressive letter once about my mailbox being the wrong shade of beige, but I fixed it and moved on with my life. I worked as an electrician, kept to myself, and figured that as long as I paid my dues and mowed my lawn, everything would be fine. I was wrong. The padlock was thick, industrial grade, attached to a heavy chain that had been wrapped around the metal gate at the entrance to my private access road. My house sat at the end of a quarter-mile driveway that branched off from the main development, tucked back in the woods on a 5-acre parcel that had been grandfathered in when the HOA was established. The previous owner had negotiated an easement that gave me the right to use this particular stretch of road, which technically belonged to the HOA, but was essential for accessing my property. Without it, I would have to drive nearly 8 miles around the mountain on poorly maintained Forest Service roads that were barely passable even in good weather. I sat in my truck staring at the chain in disbelief. It was almost midnight. I had just finished a 14-hour shift rewiring a commercial building downtown, and all I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. Instead, I was locked out of my own property. I grabbed my phone and dialed the HOA president's number. It went straight to voicemail. Of course it did. I tried the property manager next, a woman named Sandra, who usually answered her phone at reasonable hours, but midnight apparently did not qualify. Her voicemail clicked on after 4 rings. "Sandra, this is Lucas Yates from 1447 Cedar Ridge. Someone has padlocked the gate to my access road. I need this resolved immediately. Call me back." I left my number even though she had it, then sat back and rubbed my eyes. The temperature outside was dropping fast. It was early March, and while the days were starting to warm up, the night still dipped below freezing. I could see my breath when I rolled down the window to examine the lock more closely. There was no note, no warning, nothing to explain why someone had decided to lock me out of my own home. I considered my options. I could call a locksmith, but that would take at least an hour, assuming I could even find one willing to come out this late. I could try to climb over the gate, but it was a good 7 feet tall with spikes on top, and I was too tired to risk impaling myself. Or I could drive back into town and get a hotel room, but the principle of the thing made my blood boil. This was my property. I had every legal right to access it. My phone rang, startling me. I answered without checking the caller ID. "Hello? Mr. Yates, this is Sandra Chen from Mountain View Property Management. I just got your message. I apologize for the inconvenience, but the board made the decision to secure that gate pending resolution of your violation." What violation? I was fully awake now, anger cutting through my exhaustion. "You received notice last week about unauthorized construction on your property. The board voted to restrict access until you submit the proper architectural review applications and pay the associated fines." I had no idea what she was talking about. "Sandra, I have not done any construction. I have not received any notices. And even if I had, you cannot just lock me out of my property. I have an easement. The easement is contingent on compliance with HOA regulations, Mr. Yates. I'm just relaying what the board instructed me to tell you. You will need to contact President Martinez to discuss the matter further." Her tone was apologetic, but firm, like she had practiced this conversation. I tried calling her. She did not answer. "Then I suggest you try again during business hours. In the meantime, the gate will remain locked. I'm sorry, but my hands are tied." She hung up before I could argue further. I sat there, phone in hand, trying to process what had just happened. The HOA had locked me out of my own home over some imaginary violation. This had to be illegal. It definitely felt illegal. I spent the next hour on the phone with a lawyer friend of mine, Tom, who specialized in property law. He was not happy about being woken up, but he listened to my situation and promised to look into it first thing in the morning. In the meantime, he advised me to document everything and find somewhere else to sleep for the night. I ended up at a Motel 6 off the highway, lying awake in a bed that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken dreams, wondering how my life had taken this absurd turn. I pulled out my phone and started Googling HOA horror stories, finding myself in a deep rabbit hole of nightmare scenarios that made my situation seem almost tame by comparison. People had lost their homes over unpaid fines for things like having the wrong color Christmas lights or parking their car on the street overnight. Entire communities had been bankrupted by corrupt HOA boards that embezzled funds and ran up legal bills fighting their own residents. The next morning, I drove back to Cedar Ridge Road at 7 sharp, hoping maybe the lock had been some kind of mistake that would be corrected in the light of day. The chain was still there, and now there was a notice zip tied to the gate. I got out to read it. Notice of violation and access restriction. Property owner Lucas Yates has been found in violation of Pine Valley Heights HOA Architectural Guidelines Section 12.4 regarding unauthorized structures. Access to this easement is hereby restricted pending compliance with all HOA regulations and payment of assessed fines totaling $3,500. Contact HOA President Patricia Martinez for more information. $3,500 for a violation I knew nothing about involving construction I had never done. I took several photos of the notice and the lock, then called Tom again. "They are claiming you built something without permission," Tom said after I read him the notice. "Did you put up a shed, a fence, anything like that?" "Nothing. I replaced some deck boards last fall, but that was basic maintenance on existing structure. I did not build anything new." "Okay, here's what we are going to do. I'm going to send a formal demand letter to the HOA today, informing them that they are interfering with your legal easement rights and demanding immediate access. I am also going to file for an emergency injunction if they do not comply within 24 hours. In the meantime, you need to figure out what they are claiming you built. Can you get onto your property another way?" I thought about the Forest Service roads. Maybe. It will take a while, and I would need a 4-wheel drive. Do it. Get onto your property, take pictures of everything, and document that there is no new construction. We will need that evidence. I borrowed my buddy Marcus's Jeep and spent the next 3 hours navigating the rough mountain roads that wound around the backside of the development. The path was barely more than a trail in places, washed out from snowmelt and littered with fallen branches. By the time I finally pulled onto my property from the back side, my knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel, and my nerves were shot. My house looked exactly as I had left it 2 days ago. The grass needed mowing, but that was normal. The deck where I had replaced those boards was intact. There was no shed, no fence, no mysterious structure that could possibly constitute a violation. I walked the entire perimeter of my 5 acres, taking photos and videos from every angle, documenting that absolutely nothing had changed. Then I saw it. Near the back corner of my property, close to the tree line, someone had spray painted an orange X on one of the old pine trees. I walked over to examine it more closely. The paint was fresh, probably less than a week old. There were no other marks, no surveyor stakes, nothing to indicate what the X meant. But it was on my property, and I had not put it there. I called Tom and told him about the X. He was quiet for a moment. "Someone might be trying to claim you cut down trees or cleared land without permission. Did you?" "No, I have not touched those trees." "Okay. Document that X thoroughly. Take measurements showing exactly where it is in relation to your property lines. We might need to hire a surveyor to back this up, but for now, we have enough to argue that the HOA is acting in bad faith." I spent another hour documenting everything, then made the long drive back around to return Marcus's Jeep. By the time I got back to the gate on Cedar Ridge Road, it was late afternoon, and there was a woman standing next to a silver Lexus, taking pictures of the locked gate with her phone. "Can I help you?" I called out as I approached. She turned, and I immediately recognized the type. Perfectly highlighted blonde hair cut in that specific soccer mom style, designer athleisure wear that probably cost more than my truck payment, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. This had to be Patricia Martinez, the HOA president. "Are you Lucas Yates?" Her voice was sharp, accusatory. "I am. Are you the person who locked me out of my property?" "The HOA board made the decision collectively, Mr. Yates. You were given proper notice of your violations and chose to ignore them. This is the consequence. I never received any notice, and I have not violated anything." She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen a few times. then held it up to show me a photo. It was a picture of my property, taken from some distance away with a zoom lens. In the image, I could see my house, my truck parked in the driveway, and what appeared to be a small structure near the tree line. Except there was no structure there. I had just spent the morning walking every inch of my property. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "The unauthorized storage shed you constructed without architectural approval. It is clearly visible in this photo taken last week by one of our board members." I looked closer at the image. The supposed shed was nothing more than a trick of light and shadow, a gap between trees that looked vaguely structure-like from a certain angle. "That is not a shed. That is trees. I can show you right now there is nothing there. The board has reviewed the evidence and made our determination. If you want to appeal, you need to submit a formal written request and appear before the board at our next meeting, which is not scheduled until next month." "Next month? You're going to keep me locked out of my property for a month? You can resolve this immediately by paying the fine and submitting your architectural review application for the shed, along with plans for its removal." The circular logic was making my head hurt. "I cannot submit plans to remove something that does not exist." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Yates, I understand you are frustrated, but the rules exist for a reason. This community has standards, and we cannot have homeowners doing whatever they want without oversight. If we make an exception for you, then everyone will want to build sheds and garages and who knows what else, and before you know it, property values will plummet. I am sure you understand." "What I understand is that you have locked me out of my home based on a photograph of shadows and trees. That is not reasonable, and it is not legal. The HOA has legal authority to enforce its covenants and restrictions. If you refuse to comply, we can and will take further action, including placing a lien on your property." She smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "I suggest you reconsider your position, Mr. Yates. This does not have to be difficult." She got into her Lexus and drove away, leaving me standing at the locked gate, fury building in my chest. I called Tom again and recounted the conversation. "They are insane," he said flatly. "Okay, I am filing the injunction today. We should have a hearing within a few days. In the meantime, document every interaction you have with them, save every email and text message, and do not, under any circumstances, cut that lock yourself. That would give them ammunition to claim you are the problem." I wanted to cut the lock so badly I could taste it, but Tom was right. I needed to play this smart. For the next 3 days, I stayed at the motel and drove around the back way each morning to access my property and feed my 2 dogs, Max and Duke, who I had been letting run loose on the acreage since I could not get them out through the front gate. I had to call in sick to work, which I hated doing, because I could not reliably get to job sites without knowing if I would have access to my own tools and equipment stored in my garage. The injunction hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. Tom was confident we would win. But the night before, something happened that changed everything. I was lying in the motel room, scrolling through my phone, when I got a call from my neighbor, Bill Foster. Bill lived about half a mile down the main road from where my access drive branched off, and we had become friendly over the years, despite not seeing each other often. "Lucas, I'm not sure how to tell you this, but there is smoke coming from the direction of your property." His voice was tight with concern. My blood ran cold. "Smoke? Like fire smoke?" "Yeah, man. I can see it from my back deck. It looks bad. I already called 911, but I thought you should know." I was in my truck before he finished the sentence, phone pressed to my ear as I peeled out of the motel parking lot. "I'm on my way. Did you tell them about the locked gate?" "What locked gate?" "The HOA locked the access road. Fire trucks will not be able to get through." Bill swore loudly. "Are you serious? Lucas, that is your only way in." "I know. I will be there in 15 minutes. Call 911 back and tell them about the gate." I drove faster than I should have, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios, my house, my dogs, everything I owned. I tried not to think about Max and Duke trapped in a burning building, tried to focus on getting there as fast as possible. When I reached Cedar Ridge Road, there were already 2 fire trucks parked in front of the locked gate, and firefighters were standing around looking frustrated. I screeched to a halt and jumped out of my truck. "That is my property," I shouted, running toward them. "Do you have bolt cutters? We need to get through." A tall firefighter with captain's bars on his helmet turned to me. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes, Lucas Yates. My house is at the end of this road and the HOA locked the gate. I have an easement. This is illegal." "Sir, we need to access that property immediately. We have reports of a structure fire, and every minute counts." He turned to one of his crew. "Get the hydraulic cutters. We are going through." Another vehicle pulled up, and Patricia Martinez got out, practically running toward us. "Stop! You cannot destroy HOA property." The fire captain turned to her with an expression that could have melted steel. "Madam, there is an active structure fire, and this gate is preventing us from accessing the property. We are cutting it open. You can file a complaint later. I am the HOA president, and I am telling you that you do not have authority to damage our gate. That lock costs $200. And if someone dies because you delayed our response, you will have a lot more than property damage to worry about." He nodded to his crew. "Do it." The hydraulic cutters made quick work of the chain. The sound of metal snapping was deeply satisfying, even under the circumstances. The firefighters pushed the gate open, and the trucks roared through, sirens blaring. I jumped back in my vehicle and followed, Patricia screaming something behind me that I could not hear over the noise. The drive up to my property felt endless. I could see smoke rising above the trees, thick and dark. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Please let the dogs be okay. Please let them be okay. When we broke through the tree line into the clearing where my house sat, my heart sank. The building was not on fire. My detached garage was fully engulfed in flames, the roof already collapsed and the wall starting to buckle. But the garage was 100 feet from the house, and the wind was blowing the smoke away from the main structure. I parked and ran toward the house, screaming for Max and Duke. They came bounding around from the backyard, barking and confused by all the commotion, but safe. I nearly collapsed with relief, dropping to my knees as they jumped on me, licking my face. The firefighters went to work on the garage, hosing it down and creating a perimeter to prevent the fire from spreading. The captain came over to me while his crew worked. "Everyone safe? Any people inside?" "No, just me. And I have been locked out for 3 days. My dogs are here, but they are fine. All my tools were in that garage." The reality was starting to sink in. My entire livelihood was going up in smoke. "Do you know how the fire started?" "No idea. I was not here. I've been staying at a motel because the HOA locked me out." I gestured toward Patricia, who had followed us up the drive and was standing near her Lexus, talking on her phone. The captain's jaw tightened. "How long was that gate locked?" 3 days. "And you had no access to your property during that time?" "Not through this road. I had to drive 8 miles around on Forest Service roads to get here, which is why I was not here when the fire started." He pulled out a notebook and started writing things down. "The fire marshal is going to want to talk to you, and possibly to her. Blocking emergency access is a serious issue. If that gate had delayed us by another 10 minutes, this fire could have spread to your house and the surrounding woods. We are in red flag conditions right now." Another vehicle appeared, this time a sheriff's deputy. Then the fire marshal arrived, and suddenly my property was full of official vehicles and people in uniforms. I gave my statement 3 times to 3 different people, explaining about the HOA lock, the false violation, and the fact that I had been unable to access my property normally for days. The fire marshal, a stocky woman named Rodriguez, was particularly interested in the timeline. "So you were not on the property when the fire started?" "No, I have been locked out since Monday night. I've been coming around the back way each morning to check on my dogs and feed them, but I left around noon today and have not been back until now." "What time did you leave?" "About 12:30. She made notes. "And the call came in at 7:45. That is more than 7 hours. Mr. Yates, I have to ask, do you have any idea what could have caused this fire?" "None. The garage had my work truck in it, some power tools, a generator, normal stuff, nothing that should spontaneously combust." "Any electrical issues? Problems with wiring?" "I am an electrician. I know my way around wiring. Everything in that garage was up to code." A thought occurred to me. "Wait, you think this was not an accident?" Rodriguez looked over at the smoldering remains of my garage. "It is too early to say for certain, but the burn pattern is consistent with accelerant use. We will need to do a full investigation, but someone may have set this fire deliberately. The world tilted slightly. Someone had burned down my garage while I was locked out. While I could not access my property to prevent it or respond to it, the implications were staggering. "Who else has been on your property in the last few days?" Rodriguez asked. "Just me, and whoever spray-painted that X on the tree, but I do not know who that was." I pointed toward the back corner of my lot. "Show me." We walked over to the tree with the orange X. Rodriguez examined it carefully, taking photos. "This is recent. Last few days, I would say." "That is what I thought. I first saw it Wednesday morning when I came around the back way. I documented it because my lawyer said I should." "Why do you have a lawyer?" I explained the whole situation with the HOA, the false violation claim about the non-existent shed, the locked gate, and the demand for $3,500. Rodriguez listened with increasing interest, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, she said, "Mr. Yates, I'm going to be honest with you. This looks like harassment, possibly escalating to property destruction. The timing is suspicious. You get locked out, and then your garage burns down in a way that suggests arson. Do you have any enemies? Anyone who might want to intimidate you?" "Just the HOA." The words felt surreal even as I said them. "Has anyone from the HOA board been on your property recently?" "Patricia Martinez, the president, was here last week. That is when she took the photo she claims shows an unauthorized shed. I do not know if anyone else from the board has been here." "I'm going to need to talk to her." Rodriguez walked back toward where Patricia was still standing by her car, now arguing with one of the firefighters about something. I followed at a distance, wanting to hear this conversation. "Ms. Martinez, I am Fire Marshal Rodriguez. I need to ask you some questions about this fire." Patricia turned, her expression shifting to something practiced and pleasant. "Of course, but I should tell you I had nothing to do with it. I was at a board meeting all evening." "What time did your meeting start?" 6 o'clock. We met at the community center in town." "Can anyone verify that?" "The entire board was there. Sandra Chen from the property management company can confirm it." Rodriguez made notes. "When was the last time you were on this property?" "Last week. I came to take photos for our architectural review process." "Did you enter any buildings? The garage, for instance?" "No, I stayed near the road. I did not need to go farther. The violation was clearly visible from where I parked." Patricia's tone was getting defensive. "What violation specifically?" "Mr. Yates constructed an unauthorized storage shed without HOA approval." "Where is this shed?" Patricia pointed vaguely toward the tree line. "Back there in the trees. Show me." The three of us walked to the area Patricia had indicated. She looked around, confusion crossing her face. "It was right here. I saw it in the photo." "There is no shed here," Rodriguez said flatly. "There's no structure at all." "Well, maybe he removed it. That would make sense, actually, if he was trying to hide evidence of his violation." I could not help myself. Why would I remove a shed that never existed? And if I did remove it, where is the foundation? Where are the post holes? Where is any evidence that a structure was ever here? Patricia glared at me. "You are an electrician. I'm sure you know how to cover your tracks." Rodriguez stepped between us. "Ms. Martinez, I need you to be very clear about this. You claimed Mr. Yates built an unauthorized structure, locked him out of his property based on that claim. And now there is no evidence any such structure ever existed. Do you understand how this looks?" "I have a photo. The structure was there." "I would like to see that photo, right now." Patricia pulled out her phone and found the image, holding it out to Rodriguez. The fire marshal studied it for a long moment, zooming in and out, then looked up at the actual tree line. "This is not a shed. This is trees and shadows. There's no structure in this photo. You can clearly see walls and a roof line. I can see trees that create an optical illusion from this specific angle. Ms. Martinez, you locked a property owner out of his home based on a misidentified shadow. Then, while he was locked out, his garage burned down. I'm going to need a complete list of everyone on your HOA board, their contact information, and documentation of who has accessed this property in the last week." Patricia's face went red. "Are you suggesting the HOA had something to do with this fire?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet. I'm gathering information." But I will tell you this. Blocking emergency access with that padlock was illegal and dangerous. If we had been delayed in responding to this fire, it could have spread to the surrounding forest. We are talking about potential wildfire conditions. People could have died. You need to speak with your insurance company because the HOA is likely going to be facing some serious liability here. We have every right to enforce our covenants and restrictions. You do not have the right to block emergency access roads. You do not have the right to prevent someone from entering their own property based on imaginary violations. And you definitely do not have the right to interfere with fire department operations. Rodriguez's voice was hard. The sheriff is going to want to talk to you as well. Do not leave. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Deputy Wilson was walking toward us, and she seemed to think better of it. The deputy took her aside for questioning while Rodriguez came back to me. Mr. Yates, I am going to be straight with you. I cannot prove anything yet, but my gut says this fire was set deliberately, and the timing suggests it was meant to harass or intimidate you. The investigation will take a few weeks. In the meantime, I strongly suggest you install security cameras on your property and document any further contact with the HOA. If they continue to harass you, you need to report it immediately. Do you think they burned down my garage? I think someone did, and I think the list of people who might want to is very short right now. But I cannot make accusations without evidence. We will do our job, and if we find proof of arson, we will pursue charges. I promise you that. The firefighters finished putting out the hot spots and packed up their equipment. The captain came over to shake my hand before they left. Your house is safe, but that garage is a total loss. Sorry about your tools, and for what it is worth, I am filing a formal complaint with the county about that locked gate. The HOA is going to hear from our department. Thank you. Seriously, thank you for cutting that chain. If you had not gotten here when you did. I did not finish the sentence. We both knew how much worse it could have been. After everyone left except Deputy Wilson, who was still taking statements, I walked through my house to make sure nothing inside had been damaged. Everything was fine, covered in a thin layer of ash, but structurally sound. Max and Duke followed me from room to room, sensing my anxiety and staying close. My phone rang. It was Tom. I just heard from Bill Foster what happened. Are you okay? Physically, yes. Mentally, I'm pretty shaken up. Tom, they burned down my garage. You do not know that for certain yet. Who else would have done it? The timing is too perfect. They lock me out, and then my garage conveniently catches fire while I cannot access my property to stop it. If that is true, then this just became a criminal matter. The HOA is going to have much bigger problems than your lawsuit. But Lucas, you need to be careful about making accusations. If you start throwing around claims of arson without proof, they could sue you for defamation. The fire marshal thinks it was deliberately set. She as much as said so. Then let the investigation play out. In the meantime, we still have the injunction hearing tomorrow. I assume the gate is no longer locked? The fire department cut it open with hydraulic cutters. Patricia Martinez was screaming about it. Tom actually laughed. Oh, I wish I had been there to see that. Okay, so we are still going forward with the hearing because we need to establish that what they did was illegal and get a formal order preventing them from doing it again. Bring photos of everything, including the burned garage. The judge needs to see what their actions led to. The hearing the next morning was surreal. I sat in the courtroom with Tom, watching Patricia Martinez and two other HOA board members sitting with their lawyer across the aisle. The board members were a man in his 60s named Richard Campbell and a woman about Patricia's age named Jennifer Morrison. They all looked confident, like they thought this was going to be a routine matter where the judge would side with them and send me on my way. Judge Carolyn Harper was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who listened to Tom's opening statement with an expression of increasing incredulity. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, she said when Tom finished. The HOA locked the gate to an emergency access road based on a claim that Mr. Yates built an unauthorized shed. But there is no shed? That is correct, Your Honor, Tom said. We have extensive photo and video documentation showing that no such structure exists or has ever existed on the property. The HOA president misidentified shadows and trees as a building. The HOA's lawyer, a slick-looking man named Davis, stood up. Your Honor, the HOA has a legitimate interest in enforcing its architectural guidelines. Mr. Yates has a history of non-compliance. What history? Judge Harper asked. Davis shuffled through his papers. He was cited 18 months ago for having the wrong color mailbox, which he corrected immediately, Tom interjected. The point is, there is a pattern of disregard for HOA rules. Judge Harper looked unimpressed. Counselor, one minor violation that was corrected does not constitute a pattern. What about the shed? Do you have any evidence that this structure exists? Davis pulled out a printout of the photo Patricia had shown everyone. This was taken by the HOA president last week. You can clearly see an unauthorized structure in the tree line. The judge examined the photo, then looked up. I see trees. Where's the structure? Right there, Your Honor. Davis pointed at the vague shadow pattern that Patricia had misidentified. That is not a building. That is trees. Judge Harper handed the photo back. Is this the only evidence you have that Mr. Yates violated HOA rules? The board reviewed the evidence and made a determination that a violation occurred. Based on a photograph of trees, and then the HOA locked Mr. Yates out of his property for 3 days, during which time his garage burned down and the fire department had to cut through the lock to respond. Do you understand that your clients blocked emergency access? Davis looked less confident now. The HOA has the authority to restrict access to common areas for maintenance or enforcement purposes. That road is not a common area. Mr. Yates has an easement specifically granting him access rights. The easement is recorded with the county and predates the HOA. You cannot just lock someone out of their property because you think they broke a rule, especially when your evidence is non-existent. Judge Harper turned to Patricia. Ms. Martinez, stand up, please. Patricia rose, trying to look calm. Do you understand that what you did was illegal? You falsely accused someone of a violation, locked them out of their home, and blocked emergency access. The fire department had to destroy your lock to reach an active structure fire. Someone could have died. The fire could have spread to the surrounding forest. We could be talking about a wildfire that threatened hundreds of homes. Did any of that occur to you before you put that padlock on the gate? Your Honor, we were simply enforcing our rules. Mr. Yates had ample opportunity to comply. Comply with what? There is no shed. You admitted under oath that you took a photo of trees and misidentified it as a structure. How is Mr. Yates supposed to comply with a demand to remove something that does not exist? Patricia had no answer for that. She looked at her lawyer, who kept his eyes on his paperwork. Judge Harper shook her head. I am granting the injunction. The HOA is permanently enjoined from restricting Mr. Yates's access to his property via Cedar Ridge Road. Furthermore, the HOA will pay Mr. Yates's legal fees in this matter, and I am personally referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges related to blocking emergency access. Ms. Martinez, I strongly suggest you consult with a criminal defense attorney, because what you did goes beyond a civil matter. The gavel came down, and it was over. Tom and I walked out of the courthouse into the bright morning sun. I felt like I should be relieved, but mostly I was just exhausted and angry. My garage was still gone, my tools were destroyed, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew this was not over. That went well, Tom said. Better than I expected, actually. Judge Harper was clearly outraged by what they did. What happens now? Now we wait for the fire marshal's report and see if the DA decides to file charges. In the meantime, you need to get your property secured. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. If they try anything else, we need evidence. I spent the next week turning my property into something resembling a fortress. I installed 6 high-definition security cameras with night vision and motion detection covering every angle of approach to my house and the remains of my garage. I put up no trespassing signs every 50 feet along my property line. I even got a doorbell camera and a dash cam for my truck. The fire marshal's report came back 2 weeks later. Rodriguez called me personally to deliver the news. Mr. Yates, we have completed our investigation. The fire was definitely arson. We found evidence of accelerant use, specifically gasoline, at multiple points of origin inside your garage. Someone broke in through a side window, poured gasoline around the interior, and lit it on fire. Based on the burn patterns, we estimate the fire was set between 6 and 7 in the evening. Can you prove who did it? Not yet. But we pulled cell phone records for the HOA board members, and we know that Richard Campbell's phone pinged off a cell tower near your property at 6:15 that evening, despite the fact that he claimed to be at the HOA meeting in town at that time. My heart started racing. So he lied about his alibi? It appears that way. The meeting did happen, and most of the board was there. But Campbell arrived late, around 7:30, which would have given him time to drive to your property, set the fire, and then go to the meeting. We are bringing him in for questioning. Have you told Patricia Martinez about this? Not yet. We are keeping the investigation quiet for now. But Mr. Yates, I need to warn you, if Campbell realizes we are onto him, he might try to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. Keep your security system on and call the sheriff immediately if anyone from the HOA shows up on your property. I thanked her and hung up, then immediately called Tom to fill him in. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Lucas, if they can prove Campbell set the fire, he is looking at serious prison time. Arson is a felony, especially when it endangers life and property the way this did. And if the HOA knew about it or covered for him, they could face conspiracy charges. This is going to get very ugly, very fast. Good. I want them to face consequences. They have been terrorizing me for weeks over a shed that never existed. I understand your anger, and it is justified. But you need to be smart about this. Do not confront anyone from the HOA. Do not make threats. Just let the legal system work. I tried to follow Tom's advice, but it was hard. Every time I looked at the charred remains of my garage, I felt rage building in my chest. I had lost tens of thousands of dollars worth of tools and equipment. I had lost my work truck, which had been parked inside when the fire started. I had spent weeks unable to access my own property, sleeping in a cheap motel and wondering if my dogs were okay. And all because Patricia Martinez had looked at a photograph of trees and decided it was a shed. 3 days later, Richard Campbell was arrested. The news spread through Pine Valley Heights like wildfire. I heard about it from Bill Foster, who called me sounding shocked. Did you hear about Rick Campbell? Sheriff's department picked him up this morning. They are saying he set your garage on fire. I heard. I did not want to say too much, since the investigation was ongoing. Jesus, Lucas. I mean, I knew the HOA could be petty, but burning down someone's building? That is insane. People are talking about dissolving the whole board. They should. This HOA has been out of control for years, and everyone just went along with it because they were afraid of getting fined or harassed. Well, they are not afraid anymore. Patricia Martinez resigned this morning. Jennifer Morrison, too. The whole board is falling apart. That night, I got an email from Sandra Chen at the property management company. It was brief and professional, informing me that all violations against my property had been dismissed, all fines had been voided, and the HOA would be reimbursing me for damages pending the outcome of the insurance investigation. She apologized for the inconvenience and assured me that new leadership would be taking over the board shortly. Inconvenience. They had burned down my garage and locked me out of my home, and she called it an inconvenience. Tom filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA, Patricia Martinez personally, and Richard Campbell for damages. We were seeking compensation for the destroyed garage, my lost tools and work truck, lost income from the work I had missed, emotional distress, and punitive damages. The number we put in the complaint was substantial, enough to make the HOA's insurance company very nervous. Campbell's criminal trial was scheduled for 6 months out, but the prosecution offered him a deal if he cooperated with the investigation. In exchange for pleading guilty to second-degree arson and agreeing to testify against anyone else involved, they would recommend a reduced sentence of 3 to 5 years instead of the 10 to 20 he was facing if convicted at trial. Campbell took the deal, and then everything came out. It turned out that Patricia Martinez had asked Campbell to take care of the problem with my property. She had not explicitly told him to commit arson, according to his testimony, but she had made it clear that she wanted me driven out of the neighborhood and was willing to overlook how that happened. Campbell, who apparently had some issues with anger management and impulse control, had decided that burning down my garage would send a message. The spray-painted X on the tree had been Campbell marking what he thought was a good vantage point for surveying my property before he committed the arson. He had been on my land at least twice in the week before the fire, trying to figure out the best way to damage my property without getting caught. Patricia was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit arson, intimidation, and several other charges. Jennifer Morrison, the other board member, was questioned but ultimately not charged, since there was no evidence she had known about Campbell's plans. The trial was a media circus. Local news covered it extensively, running stories about HOA overreach and the dangers of giving too much power to community associations. I gave several interviews, trying to stay composed as I recounted being locked out of my home and then watching my garage burn while the HOA president screamed at firefighters for cutting her precious padlock. Public opinion turned sharply against HOAs in general and Patricia Martinez in particular. She became a symbol of everything people hated about busybody neighbors with too much authority and not enough common sense. Someone created a Facebook page called HOA Horror Stories that collected hundreds of similar tales from around the country. My story was featured prominently. The civil lawsuit settled before going to trial. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay me $450,000, which covered my actual losses plus a significant amount for pain and suffering. Patricia Martinez had to declare bankruptcy after her homeowners insurance refused to cover her liability, claiming that her actions fell outside the scope of the policy. Richard Campbell was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Patricia Martinez got 2 years plus probation, with the judge noting that while she had not personally set the fire, her reckless disregard for my rights and her implicit encouragement of Campbell's actions made her culpable. I used the settlement money to rebuild my garage, bigger and better than before, with fireproof construction and a state-of-the-art security system. I replaced all my tools and bought a new work truck, and I had enough left over to put a substantial down payment on a cabin in the mountains, far away from any HOA, where I could go on weekends and not worry about someone measuring my grass length or complaining about my mailbox color. The Pine Valley Heights HOA dissolved 6 months after the trial ended. Most of the residents voted to eliminate it, rather than try to rebuild trust after the scandal. The common areas and roads were transferred to the county, which agreed to maintain them as part of the public infrastructure. Cedar Ridge Road, my access road, was reclassified as a private easement with a county-maintained section at the entrance, ensuring that no one could ever lock me out again. I still live in the same house, on the same 5 acres, surrounded by trees that some people apparently think look like sheds. Max and Duke are getting older now, graying around the muzzles but still energetic enough to patrol the property and bark at deer. The charred foundation of the old garage is gone, replaced by the new building that houses my work equipment and serves as a workshop where I tinker with electronics and restoration projects on the weekends. Sometimes, people from the old neighborhood stop by to apologize for not speaking up when the HOA was harassing me. They say they were afraid of being targeted themselves, afraid of fines and violations and all the petty tyranny that comes with letting small-minded people have power over others. I understand that fear. I lived it, but I also learned something important through this whole ordeal. Bullies only have as much power as you give them. When I stood up to Patricia Martinez and Richard Campbell, when I refused to pay their bogus fines or accept their fake violations, when I fought back with lawyers and evidence and the truth, their whole house of cards collapsed. They had been counting on people being too intimidated or too tired to resist. They had been counting on everyone just going along with their arbitrary rules to avoid conflict. The fire department cutting through that padlock was more than just a practical necessity to reach an emergency. It was a symbol of what happens when authority confronts power that has overstepped its bounds. The chain and lock were physical manifestations of the HOA's control, and watching them get cut apart by firefighters who actually understood what mattered was deeply satisfying in a way I cannot fully articulate. Bill Foster and I became better friends after everything that happened. He felt guilty for not intervening earlier, even though there was not much he could have done. We get together every few weeks now to have beers on my deck and watch the sunset over the mountains. He always brings his golden retriever, Scout, who plays with Max and Duke until all 3 dogs are exhausted and happy. "You ever think about moving?" Bill asked me one evening as we sat watching the dogs chase each other around the yard. "Getting away from all the memories?" Not really, I said. This is my home. I'm not going to let Patricia Martinez and Richard Campbell drive me away from a place I love. That would be letting them win, even from prison. I guess that makes sense. Still, after everything you went through, I went through it, and I came out the other side. I won. They are the ones who lost everything. Their reputations, their freedom, their homes. I am still here, and I'm doing fine. And I was fine, for the most part. I still had nightmares sometimes about being locked out of my property while smoke rose above the trees. I still felt a surge of anxiety whenever I saw a silver Lexus on the road, my brain momentarily convinced it was Patricia coming back to harass me. But those reactions faded over time, replaced by a sense of peace and security that came from knowing I had stood up for myself and won. The legal bills were substantial, even with the HOA paying my fees for the injunction hearing. Tom had worked hundreds of hours on my case, filing motions and taking depositions and building the civil lawsuit that eventually resulted in the settlement. I paid him every penny he was owed, and then some, because he had believed me when I said I had not built a shed and had fought like hell to protect my rights. "You were a good client," Tom told me when we closed out the case. "You documented everything. You did not do anything stupid like cutting that lock yourself, and you trusted the legal process even when it felt slow and frustrating. A lot of people in your situation would have escalated things and made everything worse." I came close, I admitted. There were nights when I sat in that motel room and thought about driving up there with bolt cutters and just taking my property back by force. The only thing that stopped me was knowing it would hurt my case. And you would have been right about that. If you had cut that lock, the HOA would have claimed you were the aggressor and used it to justify their actions. Instead, you let them hang themselves with their own rope, and then the fire department literally cut them down. I framed one of the broken chain links from the padlock that the fire department had given me as a souvenir. It hangs in my workshop now, a reminder of the night everything changed. Visitors sometimes ask about it, and I tell them the story, watching their expressions shift from confusion to disbelief to anger as they realize what the HOA had done. The community is better without the HOA, though some of the older residents complain about the lack of uniformity now that people can paint their mailboxes whatever color they want. I think the variety is nice. My mailbox is bright red, visible from a quarter-mile away, and no one can tell me to change it. That simple freedom feels more valuable than I ever could have imagined before all this happened. I ran into Jennifer Morrison at the grocery store about a year after the trial ended. She looked uncomfortable when she saw me, like she was debating whether to pretend she had not noticed me or come over and say something. Eventually, she approached. "Lucas, I just wanted to say I am sorry for everything that happened. I should have spoken up when Patricia started going after you. I knew the shed claim was ridiculous, but I did not want to cause problems within the board." "You let her lock me out of my home," I said. "I was not trying to be cruel, just stating a fact. I know. I will have to live with that. For what it is worth, I voted against the lock, but I was outvoted 2-1. Patricia and Rick were determined to make an example of you." "An example of what? Someone who did not actually break any rules?" "An example of someone who would not just go along with whatever they said. Patricia hated that you hired a lawyer instead of just paying the fine. She said you were undermining the board's authority." "Good. The board's authority was being abused. It needed to be undermined." Jennifer nodded. "You're right. I see that now. I'm just sorry it took something so terrible for the rest of us to realize how out of control things had gotten." We did not become friends, but the conversation gave me some closure. Jennifer had not been actively malicious, just weak and complicit. That did not excuse her role in what happened, but it helped me understand how situations like this develop. It is not always outright villains. Sometimes it is just ordinary people who do not want to make waves, who go along with bad decisions because standing up feels too risky or too uncomfortable. The fire marshal's investigation also revealed some interesting details about the HOA's finances. It turned out that Patricia Martinez had been systematically inflating fine amounts and pocketing the difference. The architectural review fees that residents paid were supposed to be $75, but Patricia had been charging some people $150 or even $200, claiming the higher fees were for more complex projects. The extra money went into her personal bank account. Over the course of her 3-year tenure as HOA president, she had stolen nearly $30,000 from the community. That revelation led to additional criminal charges and added to her prison sentence. It also explained why she had been so aggressive about enforcing violations, real or imaginary. Each one was an opportunity to generate more fee income that she could skim. Richard Campbell, it turned out, had his own financial motivations. He owned a property management company that had been competing with Sandra Chen's firm for the Pine Valley Heights contract. He had apparently hoped that by helping Patricia crack down on violations and make the community more exclusive, they could justify firing Sandra and hiring his company instead, which would have brought him around $40,000 a year in management fees. So the whole nightmare had been driven by greed and petty tyranny, a toxic combination that had nearly destroyed my life and did destroy my garage. Knowing the motivations did not make me feel better, but it did make the whole situation make sense in a depressing way. I testified at both criminal trials, telling my story to juries who listened with expressions of growing outrage. The prosecutors were skilled at drawing out the emotional impact of what had happened, the fear I felt when I could not get to my dogs, the helplessness of watching my garage burn, the weeks of anxiety and displacement while I fought to regain access to my own home. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint me as a difficult person who had been antagonizing the HOA for years, but he could not produce any evidence of that beyond the mailbox incident, which had been resolved quickly and amicably. He tried to suggest that maybe I had set the fire myself for insurance money, but that theory collapsed when the prosecution demonstrated that my insurance had not even fully covered my losses, much less left me with a profit. Richard Campbell's attorney went with a different strategy, claiming his client had been manipulated by Patricia and was not fully responsible for his actions. That argument might have had more merit if Campbell had not confessed to planning the arson over several days, purchasing the gasoline specifically for that purpose, and carrying out the crime while taking steps to avoid detection. The jury did not buy it. Both were convicted on all counts. The judge in Campbell's case noted that setting fire to a building in a heavily forested area during fire season showed a reckless disregard for human life and community safety that borders on sociopathic. Patricia's judge was equally harsh, saying her abuse of authority and exploitation of her position for personal gain represented a betrayal of the trust placed in her by her neighbors and a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power in community associations. The national media picked up the story after the convictions, and I found myself being interviewed by reporters from places as far away as New York and California. Everyone wanted to know about the HOA that had locked someone out of their home over an imaginary shed and then burned down their garage. The story had everything: petty bureaucrats drunk on power, arson, courtroom drama, and firefighters cutting through chains to reach an emergency. I tried to use the attention to advocate for HOA reform. I talked about the need for better oversight, clearer appeals processes, and consequences for board members who abuse their authority. Some states started introducing legislation to address the worst HOA abuses, though progress was slow. The property rights lobby opposed any restrictions on HOAs, arguing that they helped maintain property values and community standards. I argued that property values did not mean much if the HOA could lock you out of your property on a whim or burn down your garage because you would not pay a bogus fine. But reasonable arguments do not always win political battles, and most of the reform legislation died in committee. Still, the publicity had an impact. HOA boards across the country started being more careful about enforcement actions, knowing that if they went too far, they might end up as the next viral horror story. Attorneys started seeing an uptick in homeowners fighting back against abusive HOAs, emboldened by examples like mine, where standing up to the board led to actual consequences for the people who had been abusing their power. My story became a case study in law schools, used to teach about property rights, easements, and the limits of HOA authority. Tom sent me copies of legal journal articles that cited my case as precedent for why HOAs need clear procedural safeguards before they can restrict property access. He found it amusing that our local dispute had become nationally recognized case law. I found it exhausting, but also validating in a way. At least some good had come from the nightmare. 2 years after the fire, I was finally able to close that chapter of my life emotionally. I had processed the anger, worked through the trauma with a therapist who specialized in property disputes and harassment, and reached a place where I could talk about what happened without feeling my blood pressure spike. The settlement money had been properly invested, my business was thriving again, and my property was more secure than ever. On the anniversary of the fire, I held a barbecue and invited everyone who had supported me through the ordeal. Tom and his wife, Bill Foster and his family, the firefighters who had cut the lock and saved my property, Fire Marshal Rodriguez, even Deputy Wilson, who had taken my initial statements. We stood on my new deck, looking out at the rebuilt garage and the peaceful forest beyond, and raised glasses to second chances and justice served. The fire captain, whose name was Marcus Brennan, told stories about other HOA incidents his department had responded to over the years. None were quite as dramatic as mine, but the pattern was clear. HOAs with too much power and not enough accountability caused problems that often required emergency services to fix. "You know what the worst part is?" Marcus said. "We see this stuff all the time. HOAs blocking access roads, locking gates, refusing to let us through because we are on common property. We have to waste time arguing with board members while someone's house is burning or someone's having a heart attack. It is insane." "Has anyone tried to change the laws?" Tom asked. There have been attempts, but the HOA lobby is strong. They argue that emergency access rules would interfere with their ability to maintain security, as if a locked gate makes anyone safer when it prevents firefighters from reaching a fire. Rodriguez nodded. "We have been pushing for mandatory emergency access overrides on all HOA gates in the county. Basically, a system where we have a universal key or code that lets us through without having to cut locks. But it is expensive to implement, and most HOAs do not want to pay for it." "Of course they do not," I said. "They would rather spend money on harassment campaigns against homeowners who have the wrong color mailbox." Everyone laughed, but it was the kind of laughter that comes from shared frustration rather than actual humor. We all knew the problem was real and systemic, not just a few bad actors like Patricia Martinez and Richard Campbell. As the evening wound down and people started heading home, Tom pulled me aside. "You did a good thing, you know, fighting back the way you did. A lot of people would have just given up, paid the fine, tried to move on. You stood your ground and you won. That matters. It cost me a garage and months of stress and more money in legal fees than I want to think about. But you won," Tom repeated. "And because you won, the next person who gets targeted by an abusive HOA has precedent to point to. They can say, 'Look what happened to Patricia Martinez and Richard Campbell. Look how that turned out for them. You made it riskier for HOAs to abuse their power, and that is worth something.'" I supposed he was right. It had been worth it in the end, even though there were plenty of times during the process when I had wondered if I should have just paid the fine and moved. But I had not moved. I had stayed and fought and won. Max and Duke came trotting over, tired from playing with Scout and the other dogs that people had brought to the barbecue. They collapsed at my feet, panting happily, and I reached down to scratch behind their ears. They had been through the whole ordeal with me, confused by the disruption to their routine, but loyal and constant through all of it. As I stood on my deck, looking out at my property in the fading evening light, I thought about everything that had happened. The locked gate, the fire, the trials, the settlement, the media attention, all of it stemming from a photograph of trees that someone had mistaken for a shed, and a petty tyrant who had decided that mistake was worth destroying someone's life over. It was absurd, really. The whole thing was absurd. But it had happened, and I had survived it, and now my story was helping other people stand up to similar abuses. That had to count for something. I never saw Patricia Martinez again after the trial. I heard through Bill that she had moved out of state after serving her prison sentence, trying to start over somewhere no one knew her story. Richard Campbell was still in prison, with another year left on his sentence. Jennifer Morrison had moved to a different neighborhood, unable to face the neighbors she had failed to protect from an out-of-control HOA board. Sandra Chen's property management company lost the Pine Valley Heights contract when the HOA dissolved, but she found other work and eventually started her own firm specializing in helping communities manage common areas without the heavy-handed enforcement tactics that had gotten Pine Valley Heights into so much trouble. She sent me a Christmas card every year, thanking me for exposing the corruption that had been happening under her watch without her knowledge. Life moved on, the way it always does. The story that had consumed my life for months became just another chapter, significant but no longer defining. I went back to work, took on new projects, made new friends. The rebuilt garage held my tools and equipment more than replacing what I had lost. The security cameras recorded nothing more interesting than deer wandering through the yard and the occasional curious black bear investigating my trash cans. But I never forgot what it felt like to see that padlock gleaming in my headlights, or the moment when I realized the HOA had locked me out of my own home. I never forgot the sound of hydraulic cutters biting through the chain, or the sight of my garage fully engulfed in flames while I dropped to my knees in relief that my dogs were safe. Those memories stayed with me, sharp and clear, a reminder of what can happen when small people get power over others and decide to use it without conscience or restraint. The fire department's action that night, cutting through the HOA's lock to reach an emergency, had been more than just standard procedure. It had been a statement that some things matter more than property rights or HOA rules. Safety matters more, access matters more, human dignity matters more than someone's petty power trip about imaginary sheds and mailbox colors. In the end, that was what the whole ordeal had been about, the question of what matters and who gets to decide. Patricia Martinez had decided that her authority mattered more than my rights. Richard Campbell had decided that his potential profits mattered more than my property. And they had both learned, the hard way, that there are limits to what people will tolerate and consequences when you cross those limits. I sometimes wondered if they had learned anything from their time in prison, if they understood what they had done wrong, or if they just saw themselves as victims of an unfair system. I hoped they had learned something. I hoped they had realized that you cannot just lock people out of their homes and burn down their buildings and expect to get away with it. But I did not know, and ultimately it did not matter. They were out of my life, and I was moving forward. The house still stands at the end of Cedar Ridge Road, tucked back in the trees on 5 acres that no HOA will ever control again. The gate at the entrance to my driveway has no lock, just a simple latch that anyone can open. There are no chains, no padlocks, no barriers to access. Because I learned something too through all of this. Freedom is not just about having rights on paper. It is about being able to exercise those rights without interference, about being able to live your life without someone else's arbitrary rules and regulations controlling your every move. And if another HOA ever tries to lock me out again, well, I have the fire department on speed dial. And I know they have hydraulic cutters,